Have you ever had a moment that makes the world seem both familiar and entirely new at the same time? That's how it began for me, standing at my front door, a small package in my hands, heart inexplicably racing. I had been expecting nothing out of the ordinary that day, another grey afternoon in my quiet suburban life, but the knock at the door changed everything. I'm Sarah, 59, and I've lived most of my life believing in predictability. My days were filled with routines, morning tea on the porch, carefully tending to my garden, and evenings where the TV's soft glow kept the house from feeling empty. My husband, Robert, was steady, reliable, a man whose presence I had long taken for granted. But lately, even his steady nature felt distant, like the echo of a voice I half remembered from a dream. Conversations had become clipped, silences longer than words, and a subtle tension threaded through the air of our home. That afternoon, the young man at my door seemed entirely out of place in my orderly world. He wore the neat uniform of a delivery service, a small package tucked in his arms, but his eyes were the first thing I noticed, curious, almost hesitant, like he carried something far heavier than cardboard. "Mrs. Thompson?" he asked, voice polite but tinged with a vulnerability that made me instinctively wary. "Yes," I replied, smoothing my cardigan, suddenly self-conscious. "Is this for me?" He handed me the package carefully, then paused as if weighing whether to speak. I just wanted to say something before I go," he murmured. "Sometimes, people need to know the truth, even when it's difficult." The words hung in the air. Truth. Difficult. My pulse quickened. How could a stranger at my doorstep possibly know anything about me or Robert? My mind raced through possibilities, absurd and frightening, and yet I felt a flicker of curiosity I couldn't ignore. I took the package inside and set it on the kitchen table, my hands trembling slightly. There was something almost magnetic about this moment, the way the young man had paused, the intensity in his eyes, the strange gravity in his words. It wasn't just a delivery. It was a prelude, a subtle but insistent signal that life as I had known it was about to change. As I opened the box, the scent of aged paper and faint perfume drifted toward me. Inside were letters, photographs, and small mementos, fragments of a past I thought I had long buried. Each item whispered secrets, memories, and a story I had never been prepared to confront. And as I touched them, I felt a ripple of unease, curiosity, and something darker, a silent question forming in my mind. What else had I been blind to, even in my own home? I sat back, staring at the package, aware that this ordinary afternoon had quietly, irrevocably, shifted into something far more complicated. The package sat on my kitchen table like a small, quiet explosion, demanding attention. I traced the edges of the letters inside, each one heavier than I expected, as if carrying not only ink and paper but fragments of lives I had thought were long settled. My fingers hesitated on a photograph first, a younger Robert laughing beside a woman I didn't recognize immediately. Elaine. Her presence in the background of my own memories made my chest tighten, a sudden ache I hadn't anticipated. Robert and I had shared decades together. He wasn't a man of grand gestures, but of steady, comforting habits, the way he poured my morning tea just so, or how he'd always remember my favorite flowers at the grocery store. We had built a life that many envied, or so it seemed from the outside. Yet behind the familiar patterns, subtle fractures had formed. Lately, he seemed distracted, often disappearing into his study with a phone pressed to his ear, or returning late from work trips that always felt slightly too convenient. I had wanted to trust him, to believe in the solidity of our marriage, but doubt had begun to creep into my mind like a slow fog. The young delivery man, whoever he truly was, had disrupted that fog in a single, deliberate moment. His presence, so brief yet so charged, had thrown open a door I wasn't ready to walk through. I kept replaying his words in my mind. Sometimes people need to know the truth, even when it's difficult. What truth? About Robert? About me? About the life I thought I understood? As I sifted through the box, the letters painted a picture of intimacy and secrecy. Elaine's name appeared repeatedly, tucked between affectionate sentences, shared laughter, and carefully hidden meetings. There was a sense of tenderness that made my anger clash with curiosity. These weren't merely love letters, they were confessions, vulnerabilities laid bare in ink. For the first time in years, I realized how little I truly knew about the man I had lived with, trusted, and loved. I set the letters aside, glancing around the house that had felt so familiar only moments before. The faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic, even the light filtering through the lace curtains all felt charged with anticipation, as though the walls themselves were aware that life as I had known it was on the verge of transformation. And in that silence, I understood that this was only the beginning. The young man's act had been simple, deliver a package, but its consequences were immense. I wasn't just facing letters and photographs, I was facing choices, revelations, and the fragile truths that could either destroy or redefine everything I had ever held dear. I leaned back in my chair, heart pounding, knowing that the next step, facing Robert, confronting the layers of secrets, would demand courage I wasn't sure I possessed. Yet, somehow, I knew that avoiding it was no longer an option. The next morning, I found myself unable to focus on anything except the contents of that small, now ominous package. Every glance at Robert felt like a test, each word he spoke carrying a hidden weight I couldn't yet decipher. Breakfast, usually a mundane ritual of toast and tea, became a fragile theater where every glance and gesture seemed loaded with unspoken meaning. I tried to act normal, to fold the laundry, to water the orchids in the sunlit corner of the living room, but my mind was elsewhere, looping through images and words that had long been buried. The letters whispered Elaine's name with uncanny intimacy, and with each page, I felt both the sting of betrayal and a strange, reluctant empathy. It was impossible to reconcile the Robert I first loved with the man I was now beginning to see through ink and paper. When he finally spoke, I nearly jumped. "Sarah, are you all right?" His voice carried its familiar steadiness, but beneath it, there was hesitation, an uncharacteristic edge that made my pulse accelerate. I'm fine," I lied, my words brittle. But the lie lingered, heavier than the truth. He hesitated, then left the kitchen, retreating into the study with a soft click of the door. The silence he left behind was louder than any accusation, each tick of the clock amplifying my anxiety. I realized then that avoidance had always been his and my way of coping, yet now avoidance was no longer an option. By mid-afternoon, the letters had taken over the kitchen table, photographs fanned like evidence in a courtroom I had never agreed to enter. One photograph showed Robert and Elaine laughing on a summer afternoon, carefree and unaware of the emotional earthquake that would ripple years later. Another depicted a note in Robert's handwriting, "I think of you every day. I can't tell her. I can't stop feeling this way." My hands trembled as I read, and the room seemed to contract around me, the familiar walls suddenly strangers. I realized that the life I had carefully curated was built on unseen fractures, hidden rooms filled with choices I could no longer ignore. That evening, Robert returned early. He carried groceries, his casual demeanor unnerving. "Dinner?" he asked, but his eyes flicked toward the table, toward the letters I hadn't yet hidden. I felt a surge of panic, followed by a determination I hadn't expected. "Robert," I said, voice shaking but steadying, "we need to talk. Now." His expression shifted immediately, the easy facade of domestic normalcy cracking. He set the groceries down slowly, as if bracing himself for impact, and I realized that the next words, the next moments, would change everything. The air between us thickened with unspoken confessions, the past pressing into the present, demanding acknowledgement. And in that heavy silence, I knew there was no turning back. Whatever truth awaited, I had stepped across the threshold, and there was no way to retreat. Robert sat across from me at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the space between us. His hands fidgeted with the grocery bag, twisting the handles as if they could anchor him to reality. The letters and photographs lay between us, mute witnesses to the life we thought we had and the truths we had ignored. I don't know where to start," he whispered finally, eyes avoiding mine. The weight of decades hung in that pause, each second amplifying the tension until it felt unbearable. "You start at the beginning," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I know about Elaine." His shoulders slumped, the familiar man I had married suddenly looking smaller, diminished by guilt and regret. "Sarah, No," I interrupted. "Tell me everything. I need to hear it, even if it destroys us." And so he spoke. Every confession poured out in fragmented sentences, tears gathering at the edges of his eyes. The affair had started years ago, a moment of weakness and unexpected connection. He hadn't planned it, it had simply happened, fleeting lunches, whispered calls, stolen afternoons. His voice trembled as he admitted the depth of his feelings, his regrets, and his fear of shattering our life. I listened, alternating between anger, disbelief, and a strange, reluctant empathy. His vulnerability was raw, human, yet it cut me deeper than I had imagined. How could I reconcile the warmth I had known with the betrayal unfolding before me? At one point, he reached for my hand. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said, voice breaking. "I was afraid of losing you, afraid of facing my own mistakes." I pulled my hand away, tears blurring my vision. "You've been living two lives, Robert. And I pretended I didn't see." The words tasted bitter, yet liberating. A truth I had avoided, now spoken aloud, lifted a weight I hadn't realized I carried. The letters on the table became symbols, not just of betrayal but of humanity, of choices made in fear, desire, and confusion. Elaine was not merely a shadow over our marriage, she was a mirror reflecting the parts of ourselves we refused to acknowledge. For the first time in years, the room felt impossibly still, charged with the electricity of revelation. We were stripped bare, the facades removed, left with only the raw, messy truth. "I don't know what happens next," I whispered, voice trembling. "But I can't go back to pretending everything is fine." Robert nodded, eyes wet, understanding passing between us without another word. In that moment, the gravity of decades of hidden truths pressed upon us, but alongside it came the possibility, difficult, uncertain, but real, of something new. We sat together, the silence no longer heavy with avoidance, but filled with the weight of honesty, and for the first time, I realized that truth, no matter how painful, could also be a beginning. The days that followed felt strangely surreal, as if I were navigating the familiar corridors of my home while carrying a secret compass pointing toward an unknown future. Robert and I spoke often, sometimes in quiet, measured tones, sometimes in bursts of raw, unfiltered emotion. We did not pretend that the letters, the photographs, or the betrayals had never existed. Instead, we acknowledged them, faced them, and slowly, tentatively, began to consider what could come next. It was not easy. There were moments when grief and anger surged so powerfully that I wanted to retreat into silence. And yet, within the turbulence, I discovered an unexpected clarity. The young delivery man's simple gesture, delivering a package, offering a hint of truth, had unraveled a web I had long ignored. He had given me the gift of seeing clearly, and with that clarity came both pain and freedom. Robert and I began to explore the possibility of rebuilding, not as if nothing had happened, but as if honesty itself could form a new foundation. I realized that forgiveness was not about erasing the past, but about understanding it, confronting it, and choosing how to move forward. I learned that love is not only the moments of comfort and laughter but also the courage to face difficult truths without flinching. Some nights, I still sit alone on the porch, letters tucked away, the faint scent of aged paper lingering in the air. I think of Elaine not as an enemy, but as a reminder of the complexity of human desire, of the choices that shape lives, and the fragility of trust. I think of Robert, whose mistakes revealed the depth of his humanity, and of myself, who has learned that turning away from the truth only prolongs the shadows that wait in the corners. Life is not neatly resolved. The marriage I had known will never be the same, nor will I. But the silence that once weighed on our home has been replaced with conversations, sometimes painful, sometimes awkward, but always honest. And in that honesty, there is a strange, quiet beauty, a recognition that even after betrayal, life has the capacity to surprise, to teach, and to heal in unexpected ways. I often wonder if the young delivery man realizes the ripple effect of his small act. Perhaps he does not. Perhaps it was never about recognition. What matters is that I chose to confront the truth, to see with clarity, and to step forward with eyes open. And now, in the soft glow of evening, I understand that life, messy, painful, and beautiful, is always worth facing head-on.